Hey everyone, Ben Jordan back here again on the Schematica channel with a quick tip for Altium Designer. And this tip is more geared towards new users and people who are coming from other CAD tools that you've used in the past. It may not be apparent to you how vias are created in Altium Designer right away. So I just wanted to walk through that and the normal method of doing it because it's very different from most other design tools. Almost everything you do in Altium Designer, and this is a valuable tip for anyone using this product in the PCB editor, right? Almost anything you do is governed by design rules. Why is that? Because there are manufacturing and assembly rules and constraints, and there are things about the printed circuit board fabrication process that we have to adhere to make sure we get a good result and that the PCB factory can actually build our boards with high yield. In other words, keep the costs low. So I have a design here with a few unrouted nets. Now, here's the quick, basic, this is what you'll do in the 101 tutorial, and you won't understand why it's working, but I'll start on a pad that needs to be routed, and there's a certain trace width that comes from design rules. And if I'm hugging other nets in my design, it's maintaining a clearance that's also coming from design rules. And here there's a via already placed for this one, so I'll just terminate that there. But let's say I'm routing some more, routing more, but I need to change layers to get through all of this. I can see there's some routing space under these red traces. Red is top layer by default. So I know if I change layer, I can get out under them on the next signal routing layer, which on this board happens to be the bottom layer. So at this point, I'm going to switch layers. Now, what confuses the heck out of particularly Mentor Graphics pads users and others is that if you're in the middle of routing a trace and you want to move the mouse cursor off to go to some other command or adjust some property, you're used to just moving the mouse cursor and this will stay undone, but in Altium Designer it'll scroll like you want to actually go there and keep routing. It's a separate tip, but you can actually, I'll just let you know right now, you can change and modify that behavior if you really want to in preferences. I prefer to keep the defaults because it's usually most efficient to do so. So I'm routing up here. So how do I change layers? You can see the routable layers are enabled at the very bottom of the screen. Look down there, you can see top and bottom. There's also two inner plane layers, which are ground and power on this design. And you can see there's numbers on those for the layer number. And the fastest way, my favorite way to automatically change layers is to hold down the control key, the shift key, and scroll with the mouse wheel. And that will automatically put in a via, because obviously if you're changing routing layers, you need a via. So I can click there and I can carry on routing. So I'm just going to stop that one for a second and show you another thing you can do. All right, so this is how we're actually placing the vias during interactive routing. This is the normal way to do it. Okay, so I can hit Shift V, and this gives me a dialog that lets me choose a via size. And I can pick from what's already been used in the design, that's why it says local, or if I happen to have a pad stack where I've predefined vias, so you can actually do this since I think version 18, and I had that library loaded, I could see the different IPC named pad stacks here and I could choose one, right? But that's just to Shift V to choose your different via size. But you'll notice if we zoom in with the via I just placed, it looks like the diameter, the outer diameter of the via's annular ring is the same diameter just by looking at it, eyeballing it, as the other vias. But I note that the hole is different. Now, if you keep introducing new hole sizes into your design, you're going to drive up the cost of the board because they have to have more tool changes. And the more different hole sizes you have, the more tool changes there are. Makes sense, right? So we could select all of these and consolidate afterwards as a post process, but you'll probably not remember to do that and maybe miss something. But while I've clicked on this via and it's selected, you can also see it has these other properties. It's got the length, which is based on the thickness of your board and your layer stack up. So it is actually measuring that from your layer stack up in the design. It's got the net, it's got the name of the via, which is the basic default name if you haven't otherwise defined it. So where does this size, hole size and diameter come from? It comes from design rules. So you could manually place a via. There's even a via command, right? If I go to PV, place via, that's the other way you can do it. That's the absolute beginner's way of doing it. Let's do that real quick. So I'm routing a board. I'm routing, need to change layers. Want to go up here. So then I do now PV shortcut, but that's not working because I haven't exited the routing command yet. So I have to actually stop, hit escape, right? Then do PV. And now it's giving me this gigantic, unearthly, stupid via. Where is that coming from? It's coming from design rules. It's not coming from a pad stack, which is the way pads and Cadence and other tools used to work. In Altium Designer, it's all rules driven. So what you want to do up front is predefine these things, right? So my current normal via that I've used throughout this design is, if we look at the via, it's a simple via. We could have a more complex stack and we can control clearances and things. So in just a bit of history, in some of those other tools, the reason they do things in a pad stack was it was the only way that the developers of those tools at that time, with the constraints systems and their paradigms, it was the only easy way to make it so you could predefine how much clearance from copper pores and plane layers you would have, for example. So you would not only define the top and bottom pad size for a via or a through-hole component pad, same thing, right? You would also define the anti-pad, they call it, in some of those other tools. So in Altium Designer, it's just a clearance, and clearances are also rules-driven. So you predefine all these, and Eagle and Fusion 360 are also very much like this, more rules-oriented versus predefining everything and then having to place it in the design, which personally I find is a much less efficient way to design things. This is way easier because I can set it once and it'll automatically do the right thing. Even if I decide later on to add extra layers to my layer stack, I don't have to go back and edit some library to create new pads or new via types to be compatible with that layer stack. It's all automated, right? So it's way more efficient. But that said, this is a 0.508. The selected pad right now, the one I've used throughout this design already, is 0.508, so it's 20 mils wide. And it has a 10 mil wide hole, which is, it's good to keep them all the same. So I want to do that. Now I can manually define solder mask expansion and set up tenting and all of this sort of thing. And I can predefine a via type based on IPC 4761 if I want. Right, so I can manually place a via and then edit it piece by piece, and that's going to take forever for the whole design. I want everything automated as much as possible, otherwise where is the A in EDA, you know, electronics design automation. So what I'm going to do, I know I've got a 2010 vias as my standard signal via for this design, so I'm going to go into design and rules, or DR, it's the shortcut, and this is where it's defined. So there's a whole list. If you're new to the tool, don't be daunted by this. There's basic rule categories, and you know, pretty soon I'll be releasing a course that sort of covers all of this stuff anyway. But so stay tuned. Stay tuned. Subscribe to the channel, and hit the thumbs up and hit the notification so you'll know when I'm releasing stuff like that. Okay, so there's all these different rules related to component placement, signal integrity, high-speed design, manufacturing, and DFM. That includes test points and things. Then there's internal planes. So if you need a ground plane, or if you're going to use polygons for grounding and power and things like that. I use a combination of both. These are where these are defined. But you'll see under routing, because vias normally are produced when you're interactively routing, they're under the routing rules. Now, the way rules and rule categories work is you can have more than one rule. So if you want to define larger vias for a different net or net class, you can do that. By default, and for this particular board, I only want one simple via rule, and I'm going to just be a bit lazy and make it a variable so I can allow vias within a range. But I do have a minimum size that I'll allow, a maximum size, and a preferred. In a new design, without having modified your preferences or anything, the normal way a via is selected is from the rules, and the software will pick the preferred size. So my preferred hole size is actually 0.305 millimeters. And my preferred via width is 0.508. Then my maximum, I'll allow a 3 millimeter via diameter and a 1.2 millimeter hole size. So if I wanted a heavier current via, I could do that. And then I have my minimum. Minimum diameter is 0.381. Now, I'll just create a new rule to show you something very important about rules. If I create a new rule, it gets a new default name. And I'm going to call this, let's see, SIGs for signals, right? So in that case, I can choose a net class and pick, say, a particular net class. Now, I have a net class predefined for PCIe and JTAG, but I haven't created one just for any general signal nets yet. So let's go quickly do that. And I'll go to D for design. I'll hit design and classes. So this is called the Object Class Explorer. This is where you get to set up things like net classes. So I can define a new class here by right-clicking there and saying new class, and I'll call it SIG for signals. And just for argument's sake, I mean, this is a toy design for trying things out here. I can't see the net names in there, but I'll create the class. The class is empty, but I want to add these particular nets to it. So where we have SP2 as a prefix. So let's just do this. So I'll say D for design, and then C for classes, DC. That brings me back here. So you're learning some shortcuts as you go here, people. Okay, so these are prefixed. I want to choose non-members, so I'm going to use wildcards SP2, right? And I can add these serial port 2 and make them members of this new SIG net class, okay? So then back in design rules, again, D for design, R for rules. I'm back here and I go back to my via style. Now I closed the dialog before without applying or saving my changes. That's why it's not here. But if I go back again and go new rule, and again edit this rule and call it routing vias SIG, then I can choose net class, and now the net class I just created is established. If you want to be sure you've got the right objects in your rule that will have this rule applied to them, there's this really neat feature which I'm very proud of because I was the product manager who came up with it. That's this test queries button, right? And you can see this shows there's currently in the design 92 objects that reply true to this query. Is it in net class SIG? This is a query in a query language, but it's got a graphical front end here. If you want, you can actually go use the query language, but I'll leave that for a separate episode. There's 92 objects currently in the design that will test positive for this rule. And of that, there's currently 2 objects that exist currently in the board that directly have this rule applied to them. And if I click on that, it highlights them, and wouldn't you know it, they are vias that are on that net class, right? So you can test your queries and make sure they're going to work. And if I click on the 92 objects, it highlights everything that has that net assigned, that a net assigned to it that is within that net class. So you can test everything first, okay? Make sure you're not going crazy and you know it's going to work. So now it gives me just the default out of the box via style. So it's a huge via. I don't want that, right? So I'm going to set my minimum to, let's say, this is via diameter, mind you. So this is the outer part of the annular ring. So this is going to be 0.254. So I'm just keeping it all the same here to force the interactive router to use the size I'm telling it to, okay? But again, you can choose minimum, maximum, preferred based on your preferences while interactive routing. So if I hit minimum, hole size is going to be, actually that's meant to be 10 mils, sorry. The diameter is 20, so that's going to be 0.508, which is what I specified before. Right. Now by doing this, we're gonna come up with another interesting scenario that there are existing vias on this net right now that probably won't agree with this rule, so they will now be in violation, and if that's true, we'll see that happen. So I've created my via rule. Now note well, if an object is in the net class SIG, and we're placing a via while interactively routing or assigning to that net, basically interactive routing, it will do it this way, and it won't use the next rule down in the stack. And the rules go in an order which you can see as priority. So any new rule you create by default will go to 1, which means it's the first rule processed. Very important to remember that. So I click apply and OK. Now what happens? It runs an online DRC, and we may see some violations. We're seeing some violations for other rules that are being violated, but none that I can see for that via size for the SIG net class. So now if I go back to interactive routing, and let's pick up where I left this trace off here. Why is that not snapping to the center of that? There we are. Right. So I'm just going to come up here and I'm pushing and shoving the other stuff out of the way, and of course go off the edge of the screen. It automatically updates. And now here at this point again, I'm going to change layers. You can also change layers with page up, zoom is page up, page down. If you have a numeric keypad, plus and minus will cycle through the layers on a numeric keypad. But if you're working on a laptop or a smaller keyboard that doesn't have that, Control-Shift mouse will, which is, again, my favorite way because it just cycles down. And you'll see now it's put that via exactly according to that design rule. It looks like the other net I didn't finish properly, and this may be a bug in Altium Designer, or actually, no, I'm wrong. I did actually delete that via. So if I want to place a via now and place it over those nets, now I can actually choose, because I clicked over multiple objects, I can choose the one I want, which is this bottom one, SP2_RT whatever. Now, note well, it did not obey the design rule, even though it did assign the correct net to that via. So that's kind of something I wish would be updated in Altium Designer. Guys, I'm talking to you. If we automatically assign a net and there's a net class or some other scoped rule to that net for vias, I want the via size to automatically adjust and be the right size. Because otherwise, if I'm manually placing vias here and there, they're inevitably going to be the wrong size, or I have to place a via using the PV command, but hit Tab, and then manually choose the existing. This is a benefit though of hitting Tab and going to the Properties panel. We can choose an existing via every via that's used in the design will automatically be cached as a template. So we can come back here and we have to pick the right one. I think it's the V51H25. I believe that's the right one. Yeah, it looks right anyway. It looks like the right size. So now I can hover over this and it picks the net and automatically causes the polygons to clear around it, which is really nice. So that's now compliant to the rule. There's another way to add vias while you're interactively routing if you don't want to change layers. You can hit the 2 shortcut. And just another little quick tip on the quick tip is if I'll go back to my top layer here and start routing off of this net here. If I want to place a via just to punch it down but keep routing on the same layer, you hit the 2 key. How do you know these shortcuts? While you're interactively doing something, you hit the tilde key and it gives you a big list, right? So you can see here on this context-sensitive command help menu that we have add via without layer change. You can also add a fan out via and suspend. So that's very useful if you're manually fanning out a footprint down to powers and ground layers or right through the board. So 2 will give that to you, / will give you the fan out and suspend, right? So if you want to place a via knowing you're going to put it there, 2, I can click and then I'm still routing. So if you're coming from some of those other EDA tools, it is possible to do things the way you're familiar with it if you want to. You can predefine pad stacks according to the IPC standard, as we've seen. And you can even create pad and via libraries if you want to reuse things or take it from a manufacturer who says, if you use this pad stack, you can work with that and we'll be able to produce your boards for you with good yield. That's the long and the short of it. There's more to it, obviously, with micro vias and blinded buried vias. All of that applies and all of that relates to the board layer stack as well. And so between the design rules and your layer stack up, it will actually choose the right thing. So I hope that's been very helpful. If it is, please hit the thumbs up, hit subscribe, hit like, and any other questions or follow-on questions you want answered from this, comment down below. If you have other questions at all about any kind of Altium Designer, electronics design, Autodesk Fusion 360, Eagle, it's all fair game for my channel. So please ask in the comments and I'll see you next time.